Hello, dear Fae. Today we're going to walk through the liberation of Feyre Archeron. We've all read her story, but you might not have framed her journey in your head quite like this. This video is meant for those who have read or are currently reading the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. But if you're still planning on going in blind in the future, this video is not for you. With all that out of the way, buckle up. At 19, Feyre's world is a freezing cottage and a labyrinth of snow and ice. Her family is completely destitute, and her first actual prison is duty. As their sole provider, she is consumed entirely by the brutal math of food, fuel, and survival. Even her painting, the clearest indicator of her true identity, is pushed aside, because there is no room for beauty when you are starving. When we first meet Feyre, she is undeniably strong, but only in the narrowest possible way. She was forced to become useful long before she ever had the chance to be free. When Tamlin drags Feyre across the wall into the spring court, her captivity ironically lifts her heaviest burdens. Her family's survival is instantly secured, and her body stops running on sheer panic. Given a dedicated room filled with canvases and colors, she begins to paint again, resurrecting the inner life that poverty had starved out of her. However, this release is strictly conditional. Tamlin keeps her in the dark about the blight consuming Prythian and the true dangers threatening the court. The spring court restores her physical health and her art, but her safety is completely dependent on Tamlin's control. She has traded the prison of poverty for a gilded cage, surviving as a sheltered guest with no real agency of her own. The story then raises the price of her liberation. When Tamlin sends Feyre back to the human lands, she has a brief window where she could simply stay safe. Instead, she actively chooses to return, crossing back over the wall and going under the mountain. This is the exact pivot where Feyre stops being a character dragged by the plot and becomes the one driving it. She subjects herself to Amarantha's brutal trials, strikes a desperate bargain with Rhysand, and survives purely on nerve, cunning, and an absolute refusal to quit. But her victory is not a clean escape. She emerges from the mountain changed down to the bone, deeply traumatized and hollowed out by guilt over the innocent fairies she was forced to murder. Freedom is no longer just a physical reward. It is a heavy psychological debt, and the rest of her arc forces her to deal with that cost honestly. Back at the spring court, Feyre is physically wasting away. She wakes up from severe nightmares and vomits every night. She wants to train and help rebuild the territory, but Tamlin's trauma response is absolute control. He restricts her movements, forces her to wear decorative gowns, and lets the High Priestess Ianthe take over planning a suffocating wedding. He responds to her trauma by systematically shrinking her world. This suppression reaches its breaking point when Tamlin uses his magic to seal the doors and lock her inside the estate, triggering a massive panic attack. Her absolute lack of agency proves the story's core point. Being kept safe is not the same thing as being free. The Night Court breaks Feyre's confinement by putting agency directly back into her hands. When Rhysand calls in their bargain, she is placed in an environment that demands action. He teaches her to read, trains her to build mental shields against invasion, and insists she harness her inherited high fae magic instead of burying it. In the hidden city of Valaris, she integrates with the inner circle. Cassian puts her through grueling physical combat training, completely refusing to treat her like fragile glass. They allow her to be furious, traumatized, and unsteady, while still expecting her to contribute. For the first time, she is equipped with the tools to operate as an active, capable participant, rather than a sheltered prize. This is where Feyre's liberation shifts into active recovery. Healing requires training, failing, and finally allowing other people to witness her damage. The story ties her progress directly to a chosen family that understands trauma and gives her the absolute space to exist fully. And then there is the art. When Feyre starts painting again, she reclaims the identity stolen by hunger and poverty. Every brushstroke carves out permanent room for her inner life. That is liberation too. Her story gets incredibly satisfying here. As Feyre gains more choices, she becomes exponentially more capable. Her growing capability completely destroys the option for anyone to reduce her to a bride, a hostage, or a prize. Physical and magical training fundamentally reshapes her relationship to power. Back in the Spring Court, power functioned as an external force used to contain her. In the Night Court, she must actively understand, harness, and carry her own magic responsibly. This shift forms the absolute core of her arc. The desperate girl who once bore the crushing burden of her family's survival transforms into a strategic leader. She earns her place as a respected equal, wielding her authority to shape the fate of an entire world. Romance fuels her release, but the definitive payoff is her political and strategic power. By the time the story moves into A Court of Wings and Ruin, Feyre intentionally steps back into dangerous political spaces. Returning to the Spring Court as a spy, she actively gathers information, manipulates appearances, and orchestrates moves to dismantle her enemies from the inside. Her liberation has expanded entirely from basic physical survival into supreme magical and political authority. She fully commands her own life, making her emergence as an equal leader a completely earned reflection of her own capabilities. And that's why Feyre's so relatable, even in a fantasy world. The story follows a woman systematically reduced by poverty, trauma, guilt, and being led by others. The narrative forces her to dismantle those cages one by one. She earns her final moment because the books force her to build the exact strength and self-respect required to hold her ground. And that is the liberation of Feyre Archeron. She begins as a caretaker, becomes a doll, and actively fights to become a woman of her own. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope this helped you see Feyre a little more clearly. If you enjoyed the video, bless your algorithm with a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.